I am Mark Yaneem, and I'm a founder and CEO of Wired Set. We're a digital agency in New York City. I like to call us the agency of the future. Really happy to be here. We really are in the middle of some really exciting times. I know metrics and analytics doesn't really sound exciting, but if you live the life, you know how exciting it is, and we're going to get into it. 52% of all Americans, or 154 million people, currently watch online videos each month. Approximately 40 million will be spent by companies in 2008 to create widgets. That's over 150% increase from 2007. Social networks like Bebo, MySpace, Facebook, have more page views than there are people on the planet in the average month. So, these are all great indicators that online video, social media are now reaching mainstream audiences. As engagement around these properties grow, the web's inherent measurability presents very exciting opportunities to collect and use the data created. For those of you who read Monday's New York Times, they highlighted the amount of data being collected, with Yahoo alone having over 110 billion data points in December of last year. The big question, how do we take all that information, turn it into actionable intelligence, create better web experiences, and change our businesses based on this information? To do this, we must not only have the data, but also understand the implications of each behavior and the measurable weights associated with them. Engagement is certainly a key part of the social experience and seems to be at the center of what we're measuring. At very least, we can say engagement is what happens past the impression, and at best, it's where emotional ground is broken. Metrics and measurement are the rock stars of the web, as the importance of ROI and behavioral targeting in innovative marketing and advertising strategies continue to grow. I am proud and excited to be a part of this movement. As our agency, Wired Set, just launched a beta on web analytics, a free open source analytics tool. Let's start by having the panelists introduce themselves, their companies, and how they fit into the topic of discussion. And why don't we just work ourselves right from here and go to the left. So, Alistair, let's kick it off.
Thank you. My name is Alistair Sutcliffe. I'm here to represent Comscore. Many of you know Comscore as having a very large panel of consumers, around 2 million worldwide, about 1 million in the US. And with that information, we provide a lot of services to this industry around what people are doing online, what media they're consuming, what they're searching for, what they're buying. And many of you and many people on this panel are using our databases to really look at engagement and effectiveness. My role at Comscore is to provide advertising effectiveness and advertising impression tracking products. So I'm very much on the product design side, as well as getting involved in deep analytics to prove the effectiveness of all these new emerging media types, and the established ones too.
Thanks, Alistair. My name is Scott Ross. I'm the Director of Product Marketing over at Nielsen. I work on the NetView product, which also serves, competes with Alistair's product in terms of measuring media and just basically site metrics. So my role is going to include everything from understanding the data that we report, helping to create the rules behind it, whether it be defining a metric like engagement, and to explaining how user behavior affects this. And also behind working with the methodology and working with the industry to understand how we get the data points we deliver.
I'm Kevin Calro, representing Teradata, Director of the Media and Entertainment Practice, responsible for strategy and solutions in the market. Teradata was formerly part of NCR for a couple of decades, and we spun off late last year into a publicly traded company. Number one in the market in data warehousing and analytics solutions. So the ability to take all of this data, collect it, analyze it, and provide actionable metrics on it. And that's what the focus of the company is.
Hi, I'm Dave Rosenberg. I'm the Director of Emerging Media at JWT, or J. Walter Thompson, for those of you who know it by that name. Being what many consider a traditional advertising agency brings a lot of challenges in emerging media. Of course, I think it's the oldest agency in 140 countries, so muscle memory is something that we're challenged by. The good news is that the area that we work in helps to migrate our brands into spaces they wouldn't normally have been or are asking about. And so that comes in two forms. The two forms are actually making it happen for them and actually making it relevant for them. So part of my role is to work with our analytics team in looking at the measurements that we take from these new engagement opportunities and actually making some sense of it from an ROI perspective in some cases, and also just setting benchmarks for them in the future. So that's what the general.
I'm Patrick Moorhead. I'm the Director of Emerging Media at Avenue A Razorfish. For those that don't know the company, Avenue A Razorfish is one of the largest digital ad agencies in the world. We're also the only ad agency owned by Microsoft. And we like to claim at least partial credit for inventing the modern web analytics and ad media tracking practices that currently kind of run this business. My role in the agency is half trend spotting for new technologies and new marketing opportunities for our clients, and half prototyping, which isn't a word you hear very often around media, except that when you're dealing with really nascent, I think, channels and audiences, prototyping media plans is becoming increasingly important for our clients.
Thanks.
I'm Colleen Soriano. I'm representing Media Edge CIA. I am Group Director at MEC Interaction, which is the digital arm of Media Edge CIA. We're part of Group M, which is WPP's investment management group. In particular, I am responsible for bringing digital strategy to our integrated campaigns and implementing on that. We've taken a very consumer-centric approach, and so we start with consumer insights and sort of roll those out across different touch points. So it requires a lot of integration between online and offline media.
Thank you so much, all of you. So as we were in the first phase of the web, the publishing phase, if I will, it was very easy to measure, or there was pretty much standard measure techniques in place. As we moved to the social web, the content itself is measured, and then now we have the added dimension of behavior around it to be measured. So that kind of is where people put the engagement word into play, I think. In my mind, it's like you saw something and then you had an action because you saw it. It could have been friending, favoriting, forwarding, any number of behaviors. Are you all looking at this as almost like a bifurcated thing where you can actually measure content, but then there's also new measurements emerging around the actual behavior surrounding the content? And, you know, anyone jump in first, but I'd love the whole panel to kick it out on that one.
Well, I'll start. Having a panel that can view what somebody does from the moment of the impression all the way through to buying or searching for the product is quite a luxury, because you can design some great tests to prove exactly the impact that those ads had on that consumer. And really proving that something works or not is what keeps this flow of advertising dollars into these media types. And so our clients are really asking more and more, don't just tell us how many streams were viewed, don't tell me just what the reach was of a campaign, but actually tell me the lift and the ROI of each of these media types, and how do they stack up against one another. So much of our work now for agencies like Avenue A is proving the effectiveness of the engagement with the ads on what it makes you do. And a lot of those measures are actually, what do you buy, both online and offline? After seeing the ad, do you go to a search engine and search for the brand? And people are getting very creative on how you measure the action. It's not just the click anymore. It's all about what do you do with a latent period after exposure. And that's what we're being challenged with in the ad effectiveness and ROI space of engagement.
David, do you look at it the same way from your perspective, or?
Well, generally, yes. The way we look at behavior is interesting because we borrow some from traditional behavior analytics, behavior change models, and how to migrate people along a consumer pathway. So if we can take the analytics that we're deriving from social interaction, whether it be friending or time spent, is actually looking at those as saying to clients, look, what we would like to do is say, it's hard to say is 20,000 views or 20,000 views good or bad. But if we can say to them that we look at viewership as one metric, as one of the key indicators that will move behavior, so if we can sort of equate behavior with certain analytics, then as those analytics go up and down, we sort of equate that with behavior change. So that's how we look at some of these new tools at our disposal and use them in the continuum of what maybe we looked at as traditional behavior change.
Patrick, are there specific behaviors that you see clients looking for, or are you directing them towards?
So it's a really interesting question. I think I sat up here probably a year ago and made a passionate case for kind of standardization and measurement, particularly in things like mobile, where I was feeling a need a year ago for kind of a coin of the realm, if you will, to be able to do some cross-media analysis. And I've actually come today to reverse my position. What I'm finding more and more is that because the modality of interaction around media is so dramatically different from one type of media to the next, that we're actually getting a lot more value for our clients by customizing what we measure and how we measure it on a kind of a per execution basis. So I kind of agree with what you guys are saying. I think that the challenge in measurement right now is as much about kind of starting with the audience as opposed to starting with a measurement standard or a metric and then kind of backing into the ROI, and then ROI can be defined in a lot of different ways. So everyone kind of uses, engagement, I think, as a catch-all. I mean, what does that mean? Well, the only way to answer that question is to start with the audience and ask the question for the brand, what are you seeking to accomplish with that audience? What kind of engagement with your audience would kind of work for you is kind of the question. And then are we hitting that, yes or no? Are we making the right moves around that certain media vehicle to at least create an environment where that would be possible to happen? And using that as a kind of metrics platform, which is completely outside of standardization. It's also completely, the click is dead kind of approach.
Absolutely. It's beyond the page and the click at this point. I'd love to get a little granular with everyone else on that specific question, but you actually asked one of my next questions is what is engagement? And I couldn't agree more with you on that. It means different things to different people and specific to the product and the web service or whatever you're looking at. So with that being the case and non-standardization being the recommendation, are there any baseline engagement metrics that everyone should be looking at, like getting the consumer closer to the product, or as Alistair said before, which was like measuring if they actually go online or offline to actually buy it, which is a tricky, and I don't want to get into that because that's not the focus of this panel, but it's hard to measure, I spent a lot of time with that product online, and then I went into the supermarket the next day and actually bought it. So what is baseline measurement around engagement, if there's any?
But I would say that if you're looking for a universal engagement metric, kind of your foundation, I think time spent is the only one right now that exists. Page views, I think, serve that for most environments as of maybe a year ago, but as the page has become richer, as video and Ajax and everything's been embedded in it, page views are no longer universal across all media. So if you start with time spent, I think you have to move then to vertical specific. And I think if you look at, if you went to social media, I think what we need to look to is how do we standardize some of the activities that happen within there? How do we create, so in this case, would we track a post? Do we consider that the same as what a page refresh would be? Do we consider playing a new video to be the same? Where I think it ties in, and it ties in somewhat with what Alistair's saying, is it begins and ends with ad opportunities. So I think the challenge is, on the publisher and agency side, what do we consider ad opportunities? What behaviors are triggers for it? And then we look to measure each of those triggers and break them out as much as possible to understand the differences in behavior across sites.
Okay. Colleen, same thing? Or?
So a couple of things. I completely agree with your point that objectives really dictate the types of metrics that we look for different clients. So if someone comes to me and asks for an engagement campaign, I'll put it right there on the list with targeting unicorns online. Like it's sort of tough. So it's really understanding, what we're trying to get at, what the value is. I think, in particular regard to social media, I sort of disagree I think things like time spent and number of posts and a lot of sort of quantitative metrics that we can measure are great signposts. So it's great to know that people are spending time with our content and posting, but particularly with social media and the blogosphere, you know, when we look at what it is sort of and equate it to larger media, it's a focus group. It's a huge focus group for us to see. So while it's great to say we have 10,000 friends and they posted 5,000 times, what's important is, you know, what are they actually saying? You know, what sentiments are sort of being expressed? What's the tonality? And then are we going to take action from that? Because, you know, metrics are only important as the actions that are taken from them. So I think it's important to understand when you go into the social space or the blogosphere that you're going there to understand consumer insights. You wouldn't necessarily try and sell your product at a focus group. You would try and understand your consumers and make decisions based on that. And I think
and they
social media
very
space-
often can be the very most passionate, but not representative of the entire audience sometimes. So that's
Right, so I
tricky
think
as well.
First understanding, you know, what it is they're actually saying, and then secondarily trying to assign a value to that particular group of people who are making those comments, and then making the decision as to whether you will alter your product, your marketing plan, your communications plan, et cetera, based on that.
Kevin, did you want to chime in?
Yeah, you know, I would just preface by saying that the reason why I love this industry is because 4 years ago, many of us were here or at conferences like it, and we were talking about impressions, and we were all talking about how many views were you getting, and that was the holy grail. And now that doesn't even begin to tell the story. A couple years ago, we were here and we were hearing, well, it's not just about the impression, but how many people are actually clicking on it, clickstream analysis. Now, if you talk clickstream analysis, that's completely obsolete too, because that doesn't tell the story. So now you're not even talking about just how many people are buying, but then you want to know, well, we gave them the perfect ad, why did they not buy? So all of this evolution is amazing, it's dynamic. If we were all here talking about the same thing we were a few years ago, there would probably only be about 10% of us here. But I think the key really is sometimes businesses try to get too cute, and what it comes down to is that level of interaction. What can you provide to that person that's going to get them to interact? If I have 15 screens open with 15 different promotions, but I'm on email the whole time, none of those 15 are going to have any kind of pull-through associated with it. If you allow me to interact and start typing things and start giving information, and you know, those are the ones I'm going to remember, those are the ones I go back to later, and those are the ones that ultimately, maybe not the first or second time, but those will be the ones that ultimately monetize my behavior.
Excellent. So as, say, a content producer or rights holder, I might have content that is both facing all these great new technologies that are emerging, that are changing the way we're measuring them, as well as my content's going to be spread out across the edges of the web. So I might have a single video and I'll have it up on my destination site, but at the same time it's going to be on 20 social media sites and everything else. So I'd love to see both agency and analysts take a look at how do you cluster or how do you get aggregate views across a brand or a piece of content and the behavior when it is so, you know, spread out across the edges at the same time. And maybe the people who measure first start, and then we go into what the agency challenges are around that.
Well, measurement of streams for Comscore is very difficult because a lot of the time you can't separate out the ads from the actual content. So that's one thing that our clients are wanting. The other thing is to separate out user-generated content from actual show content. Because right now, the vast majority of ads are being placed on the premium content and shows. The ads are not being really placed on user-generated content that's distributed across the web. So there's sort of two levels, and a higher level is what we're going to evolve to, and I'll describe that. But the base level of insight in products like Videometrics, and Nielsen also has a video product. But in Videometrics, what we're doing is we're counting the number of total streams. Wherever they are across the web, just tell me who's published the most streams. So site by site, who's displayed the most streams to people going to those sites. The number of unique people actually viewing those streams. And who they were, so the demographics around those people. So that's sort of a universal measurement of all streams, whether they're user-generated or whether they're content of shows, premium content. But
Scott,
the next,
I'm sorry.
the next level has to really be show level ratings. And I think that's what the measurement side will evolve to, that we will actually be providing ratings for The Office, for Lost, for other premium content, and not just saying how many total streams there are.
Across television and web, or are you just saying first the web needs to, television is obviously there, but the web needs to say we have a 3-5 share or something along those lines, or?
Yeah, I think to continue to attract the dollars, you've got to get down to those rating points for individual shows online. And, you know, and have a similar, it doesn't have to be an exact, but have a similar currency that exists offline so that people know exactly how many ratings they're buying, but on a show level.
On the Nielsen side, we look at it that one of the challenges we've seen with video, and one of the opportunities really on the video side, is how viral it becomes. I think it started with YouTube, the ability to just basically create an API where you could embed videos anywhere was great, and I think the brilliance of it is that it's still coming from a central source where you can still kind of control the measurement of it. What we've done there, a lot because of the complexity itself of the streams that go through companies like Akamai. So if you looked at a stream, it's incomprehensible compared to the relative clarity of a URL. We've actually worked with publishers on a hybrid solution where we actually tag the video, and we're looking for that tag specifically in our panel. What that allows is that tag, we could embed the information that tells us the originator of the video, the show, all the details that one would need. So that's been proving quite successful, specifically with some of the, both with established video players, so the NBCs, the CNNs of the world, as well as some of the newer players that are trying to figure out how do I get this measurement of the amount of people seeing my videos across all the different environments.
Are clients asking for that stuff? Patrick, Colleen, David?
I think, frankly, I think the issue with viral video with our clients has less to do with metrics and more to do with the fact that there's not very much interesting content out there. So, your 30-second spot that runs on TV or a very heavily branded game or application, it's not that interesting. So I think a lot of times we're not pushing, particularly within client organizations, and then pushing on agencies as well to really put a lot of creativity into what that content could be. I think a lot of times it comes to, we have this spot, can we seed it on YouTube? And it's not necessarily the right thing to do. So I think there's actually been hesitation in going into that space more because of the content than because of the lack of defined metrics.
So they're uncomfortable going in it, or they really don't care about the measurement? Because like the blended guy who just blends everything on YouTube all the time, like he's seen, like he doesn't need to measure the video plays, although he can see it on the channel. He needs to measure like, oh, I'm selling more blenders, right? So that's a great end result to not even look at some of that stuff, or look at it and see how many hit a critical mass before you started selling, increasing your sales. Mm-hmm. Same thing for you, Patrick? Or?
Well, I totally agree with you. I think, especially now kind of coming through the Microsoft lens, I mean, we've got technology to be able to follow video around wherever it goes. Like, I don't think the challenge of measurement is not a technical one. There's overlay, the same overlay technologies that we would use to display an ad unit in the lower 20 on a piece of web video, like a panache or something like that, are the same that we'll use to serve tracking pixels and click tags, and that'll embed to the stream, and that'll be fine, and we'll follow it all over the place. The bigger challenge is making a piece of content that actually is going to do that, right? That's where it's hard. I think the clients that we're working with desperately want to be the maker of that piece of video that causes that challenge of, can I follow it around to 5 million MySpace page embeds, right? That would be a great problem to have. The problem I have is we can't find a piece of video that is that lightning in a bottle type of effect. I was actually looking at some research yesterday. I don't know if anybody's familiar with this company, Sands Research. They're based in DC. Dr. Stephen Sands is a veteran 20-year PhD neurological scientist, studies the brain. And he's showing me data that basically shows that after the first 5 seconds of any 30-second TV spot, the human brain turns off. Over and over again. thousands and thousands of subjects. He's showing me these data models that just basically look like this. Commercial comes on, and then the brain just turns off. That's the bigger challenge
5
to
second
me
spots.
than if they take it over to their Facebook page, can we follow it there?
Do you make longer? I think you just make shorter spots. You know,
We have to make.
You know,
I mean, we got to do
They're there for
something.
5
We got to make
seconds, let's-
better.
yeah.
I think that's the message from Dr. Sands is we got to make better spots, and then.
none of them got past 5. Like all the spots you looked at.
Oh, it's
like-
unbelievable! And it actually, on the second, third, and
The
fourth
Affleck
exposure
duck,
to a
nobody?
TV commercial, the initial excitement of the brain is smaller and faster, and then it dies quicker. So by the third or fourth time a human being is seeing the average TV commercial, this is 90% of TV commercials.
Tune out.
Their whole brain is turned off by 15 seconds into the commercial. I mean, these people are hooked up to a machine. It's not like a fuzzy math thing. You can see the areas of the brain lighting up. Now, there's exceptions. He ranked every Super Bowl commercial, right, on using this technology, and so he can show you there are some commercial executions that are really good, like Doritos commercials for some reason. The way they do the logo at the end and how they do it, it kind of spikes and plateaus, which is pretty good. But the vast majority don't do that. So that's a bigger challenge of measurement than.
Does Dr. Sands live in a undisclosed bunker location?
He
Let's not out him.
does live in El Paso, Texas. No, I mean he had an article in USA Today where he kind of disclosed the findings of this research about all the Super Bowl TV spots and basically
Yeah, I saw that
kind
one,
of single-handedly destroyed, I think, the television advertising business. But
Well, let's not take it that far.
Well, they're all going to need to spend their money in this space then, clearly. So this is why these measurements are important. So you touched upon a couple of things that I'd like to just briefly touch on because they can be long discussions otherwise is, the sensitivity, and I'd love everybody to chime in on the advertisers around user-generated content. More and more it seems like it's loser-generated, and they have that's why I call it loser-generated content, and they step back from it a little bit. And as we get into these more complex models, are we seeing advertisers with a certain hesitancy because with an X amount of spend, will they not spend as much in the UGC space because of that, or not even touch it for that matter?
I think, there's a couple of issues. I mean, I think earlier on with UGC content, it was sort of that Wild West mentality that advertisers were to caution. They were a little bit. They want to be cautionary with their funds. I think now it's less, the fact that the content is risque. I think it's more that it's not great content. And
right.
There's more and more. We're getting a lot more professionally produced content distributed online through mobile applications, et cetera. So we don't necessarily have to turn to that.
Is there enough of it out there to buy against?
In terms of professionally produced?
Yeah, authentic media, if you will?
Absolutely. I mean, I think a lot of the strides that we're making with the on-air networks have been huge. And I think that, even with aggregators like Hulu, it's coming more and more. I think what we've been challenged with is compelling original content for online, and we'll see where that goes. I think digitally we've been fantastic from a distribution standpoint and understanding ways to share pieces of content and distribute them. I think that we haven't been great at being content producers. And so hopefully we'll see more and more of that, in the next few months and years.
David, same experience, or?
Yeah, generally, the move from user-generated content and measuring, in particular to this panel, it really did come down to content, and I think where that's going to is making the process more simple from a creative standpoint. Giving people a camera and letting them turn it on and try to make a commercial is a very daunting task. Giving them a simplistic formula for which they can submit participation is a much easier task. Kicking a soccer ball to the right, cut, done. I can do that. So these kind of things will evolve just like the analytics that go into measuring them. Relative to original content and creative driving sort of viewership engagement, we did something for our Unilever brand called Love Bites, which was a 2-minute series that ran, 80 episodes, and really that was the cornerstone of a social media program. So the content itself was good. I mean, it was 2.5 minutes. There was no real mention of branding in it. It was surrounded by the brand, and let's call them commercials or any types of other branding messages, but that content was placed into various aspects of social media marketing, if you will. And within those individual unique areas, there are different measures for engagement in that overarching sort of tool. So in each one of those, you have to look at the environment in which it sits and what engagement means in that particular environment, and also the category that it sits and the brand that it is. I mean, all these things are relevant, but back to the creative as being a sort of driver of that, that's completely true. Yeah.
Anyone else finding the same thing or different? Patrick, same thing?
I mean, I would just say not much on the traffic end, but unfortunately, because of the proliferation of all these mediums and channels, folks have chosen market entry ahead of like product or content differentiation. So they just want to get something up there, and they're not so much concerned with how quality it is or how relevant it's going to be to these people. So you end up having a problem. You have irrelevant ads to people because you're not doing enough metrics, you're not doing enough studying on what really matters to them. You're just in a rush to get something up there so you can put out a press release saying that you now offer this kind of service.
We as an agency spent pretty much most of last quarter with companies that did just that, but then found out they had nobody actually adopting it, so they would hire us to actually plug in and actually try to drive customer adoption to it because they weren't thought out all the way through. So, you know, that kind of like starts to give you diminishing expectations as like a brand or an advertiser. So there are enough expectations that need to be sorted out in the space as like, you know, I could say Core to Life as an example of the expectations associated around that when it aired on NBC, how quickly it trickled down to the secondary networks within that family because of performance expectations. So it's curious to see which, you know, where these expectations lie, how do you manage those things, and how do you, you know, if the ultimate value for that was tune in on air, you know, maybe that wasn't the ultimate, you know, what you shouldn't be shooting for, and maybe building like David was alluding to is 2.5 minute spots where driving engagement into a social network that would have a life past like the spot, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, they weren't spots in the sense of a traditional commercial. They were
Programming,
geared,
if you will.
they were original content geared towards the target consumer, and they were entertaining, and they were actually quality, and they lived in places where people would hopefully enjoy them. I mean, at the end of it all, if we're going to measure something, ideally, the products that we're putting out there need to be relevant and enjoyable because we're asking people to do something with it by placing it there. So it better be good, and it better be worth some commodity or worth some value to them beyond just an ad in their space.
Just a quick anecdote. I'm sort of in the last 6 months I've been living in a bubble of trying to develop a solution for this space, and I'm always getting a lot of upstream attacks from senior management. Hey, when are you going to be done? And my question is always, well, we're in that differentiation mode, and the 3 words that I most often use in conversations, meetings, and presentations would be, and I've actually heard all of them here. One is right, R-I-G-H-T. The other one is relevance, and the other one is intelligence. And so, again, these 3 terms may not have been used for the last few years, but it's got to be the right person at the right time with the right ad. It's got to be relevant to them. And then there needs to be some level of intelligence that you're using to basically get all that data about them.
So let's talk a little bit about the data points and the difference between passive data mining and behavioral targeting. Certainly some of the consumers raised their hand around and we're not going to spend too much time on this, but around Beacon and how that was articulated. And is that an issue with anybody up here? Does that come up in conversations with clients, or are you looking at more passive data mining from your perspective because of that, or from an advertiser and agency perspective, are clients saying anything along those lines? Like, I don't want to be, you can almost measure success by if you're not called out these days. So is that a metric?
I don't know.
I mean, so, on one hand, we'll kind of take any data that we can get. Passive, real time, like the more the better. that's not to say that we do that without any mind of kind of PII, ethics, et cetera. I think it's trial and error. You know, we want to get the right mixture of value on both sides of the equation, right? From the consumer point of view, I think there's some idea that you know, consumers are willing to kind of trade information in the interest of not seeing head-on commercials all the time. But you know, where that line in the sand is between Big Brother versus a really meaningful, relevant media experience, I think it's trial and error, and I think it's probably not something that we can ever kind of standardize either. I think it shifts with culture and kind of public opinion. So Beacon goes out and tests the limit of it, and then we know that based on kind of the landscape of today, maybe we're not ready for that yet, right? I mean, on the flip side of things, when you look at, I mean, we talked a lot about online. I mean, we've seen in mobile, consumers are far more willing to share very personal information with us about their behavior around mobile in exchange for free content and kind of access and cheaper phone bills.
So it always comes almost down to the value exchange in a way?
I think it does, yeah. I think that's the real point, is that there's not we're not going to have the ability to kind of say, well, this is the limit of data that's appropriate and that goes for all media all time. I think that it's got to start with the audience, and it's got to organically kind of, the measurement tools and data has to come from the audience, and we have to, the challenge now is to find ways to kind of make ROI sense of that in some ways. Like, I mean, in digital signage, for example, you know, I was at the Digital Signage Expo in Las Vegas 2 weeks ago, I guess. I mean, there are digital signage tracking solutions now that are using declassified NSA pattern recognition that can know how many eyeballs are looking at the screen for how long, and if it's a man or a woman, and track all that in real time. And I mean, that's captured in the wild. PS, they've been doing that for like 10 years. But now you can buy that and put it on your Clear Channel sign, right? So I mean, again, it's just kind of testing the boundary. Is that okay or not? And if it's not, then what's the right mixture to get the value right?
Anyone else on that? So value exchange, as an end user who might like to consume massive amounts of video online, the value for me is being able to get at the show that I want to look at and in a quick and timely fashion. And we've seen a bunch of models for monetizing video online, from bottom third violators in the beginning of it. I'm curious to see if there's any feedback a la Dr. Sands on, you know, okay, if you start with a 1 minute pre-roll for a 2 minute clip, what is the fall off? Or if you're using these bottom third violators, do more people, like, is it more acceptable? That's when like a chyron comes up in the bottom third of a screen. I love that they call it a violator for some reason, because it is violating the user experience to a certain extent. So as those different tactics come out to monetize that, are we seeing anyone emerge as the least offensive or the best value exchange?
I think again that depends largely on the execution itself, so the actual piece of creative and how intrusive you make it or not. You know, I think just in comparison with the television space, you know, what we're seeing right now is, for that professionally produced content from the networks, that content, you know, an online video impression within a full episode player is more valuable than a TV impression. It's certainly a higher CPM, I'll tell you that much. And we're seeing that as a younger, more affluent, more educated audience. We're seeing the ad recall is very high. So I think, you know, the same sort of structure that people are using to time shift and skip ads works online, I think, because we've created an environment that's less cluttered, so less ads per pod, which is huge. And then more interactive and more relevant from a targeting standpoint. So the fact that we can zero in on the right person, offer them the same content, but just have a little bit more control over how that's served and how we want them to interact with it, that's been received very well. So again, I think it really just depends on the environment and the execution itself, how we're using those tools.
Yeah, and we've actually tested the effectiveness of video ads, compared it to display ads, compared it to paid link exposures. And it stacks up incredibly well, and I think one of the reasons it does is because when you're in non-user generated content, when you're within shows, you can actually target those ads incredibly effectively. I think YouTube has made a decision more on the display side to place display ads on the page of user-generated content, but not actually in the content itself. But that's the exact opposite of professionally produced television shows online, where you can actually embed the ad. And I think we totally agree the effectiveness of those ads is superior to display on its own. It's probably superior to television, although we don't have too many data points around testing that.
And there's one point to it too. When I talk about categories, it may be that the habits of our consumption of video are different for pure entertainment versus something that may have retail implications, where we would want overlays on our ads to help us purchase things within it, or at least know that they're there. So as we look towards metrics and analytics towards viewership of video, I think we have to look at what the role of video is going to be moving forward as well. It's not just one size fits all. It's true that the lower third folks, and even on YouTube, they do it in their own content network. If you're a content partner, you have the ability to revenue share with them on your own content by allowing them to display that. So is it intrusive? Probably. Is pre-roll the right answer? I don't know. But ultimately, it's going to come down to how we consume video and what the role of video really is to determine the metric.
Kevin or Scott, anything on that?
I would say that I'm usually a pretty good test case for ads because I'm mostly intolerant to anything above 15 seconds. And then, so I say if something can get me tuned in for more than 15 seconds, and that would mean it would be relevant, because some folks who hear what I do and what I'm into, they would ask why I would want to promote advertising because it's intrusive, and I say it's only intrusive if it's irrelevant.
Right.
If it's relevant and it wants to make you buy something, and if you do buy something because of it, I would say it would be constructive and useful and very necessary. So, I mean, if I'm watching a 1 minute pre-roll and it's talking about, like Barbie or something, that's probably not going to get my interest, and I would call that intrusive, irrelevant, and probably
Fail.
a few other things. But on the other hand, if you're showing me footage of the, and Patrick, you brought the Super Bowl, one of my favorite topics, being a Giants fan, if you show me footage of that game and you want to give me something to buy, maybe a DVD, a jersey or something, I'm going to interact with that. I'm going to buy it, and I won't call it irrelevant later when I'm wearing it on the streets.
Excellent. Only because I want to get to panel questions, audience questions. This is a space that has a lot of diversity, and I'm curious actually from the audience before I even get to the panel, is like a trend that's kind of emerged in the last year is microblogging, meaning like on Facebook it's your status update, on Twitter it's what you're doing, you're twittering. And there's even LinkedIn now has a little microblog thing on the left side as you look at that network. How many people actually in the audience participate at all in microblogging and status updates? Show of hands, excellent. And on the panel, good. So are we, because this gets into sentiment mining and all sorts of semantical excellence. What, if any, tools exist right now out there for mining this material and or measuring it? Has anyone even started in that category, or is it even relevant, or is it just like noise and no signal?
I mean, I don't know what you'd do with it, frankly, if you could measure it.
You get an aggregate view of something.
I mean,
maybe
maybe it starts to play a role in how we conduct word-of-mouth research online via, a Nielsen product or a competitive product. The extent to which companies like Nielsen or Umbria can scale their data capture facilities to keep track of all of the Facebook status messages that change 20 times a day or an hour even, and kind of sorting through all that on top of the whatever gajillion blog posts and anything else that happens on a given day, I'm skeptical. I mean, ultimately it would be valuable to know what people microblog about. I don't know that there's an advertising opportunity, but I think from a kind of consumer, understanding the consumer point of view.
Sure. Or demographic profiling or any of those things. Sure.
I have no idea how to do it, though.
Yeah. And
We would probably look at measuring it if there was some degree of monetization of that actual media type, if you can call it a media at all. To me, it's a bunch of text messages about, whether you have your latte extra hot or not.
yeah, but like, I've seen kids text message out of a theater that I'm at the 5:30 showing of this movie and don't even bother going to the 7:30. So I'd say these things definitely have impact. And I'm an active microblogger, but like when I asked my sister in London to do it, she said, "I'm not going to tell people I'm looking out my window." I get that, and I see that, but I also happen to follow many intelligent minds on those same channels, and I have interesting aggregate views of them because over a month I now have a really interesting profile of them, and when I run into them on the street, I don't even have to ask them if they're looking for a house or how's the new job going because I already know. So, even in the old words of append, in the credit card world where you append information on somebody, I would think it has value, but maybe that's a place to stay safe, and not be monetized from advertising. That's kind of what I'm hearing.
Yeah, I think there are ways to track, in the same way that we can track posts across the blogosphere and social networks, I think there are ways to track the volume of posts around a given subject and the sentiment, et cetera. But to your point, I don't think that there's a lot that we can make actionable from it. I will say that the one really great use, frankly, of all sorts of emerging media that I've seen recently, and this is any sort of political leanings aside, is the Barack Obama campaign and website. They are basically touching every sort of emerging media, and they've forged a really interesting partnership with Twitter, particularly for campaign updates on the road, et cetera.
I'm following him, but I'm not getting enough messages, and certainly not the juicy ones.
Well, maybe because he doesn't want to tell you when he's just looking at his window.
Okay.
But so I think that campaign, I think overall is a great case study in all sorts of different emerging touch points, but particularly in that microblogging sense, and that they're really taking advantage of it and drawing people in.
Does anyone think that politics went backwards on the web the last 4 years at all? Like, I see it as fundraising, and that's being very effective, but from what I saw with like the Dean attempts, he was much more aggressive in what he was doing with social networks and all sorts of other things. Now I see these nets and social media playing a big role in it, from the consumers actually uploading and participating in it, but are the politicians really fully taking advantage of that from a measurement and/or metric standpoint?
I would just say my personal opinion is they want either your money or your vote. And if they
anything else doesn't matter.
Yeah, and if they can't have your money, then perhaps they want to come off as that gentle soul that likes to watch people crossing the street during rush hour, and you can identify with that and say, wow, he was really looking out the window, looking at people go to the subway. I mean, how irrelevant that may be, they want one or the other.
Sure.
I will just say one thing. Oh, sorry. One thing. We, not getting into politics, but someone
we're not gonna.
Someone on his campaign's looking at the numbers. I can guarantee you that, and they may not have time to look at them because they're busy campaigning. But someone on there is geeking out, looking at the numbers of what's going on.
I hope so.
And occasionally, those numbers are making their way to someone who sits at a table and discusses the hierarchy of the strategies. So it is a role that has evolved.
Well, because it's like talk about actionable metrics. That would be one of them because they're on a pretty quick timeline. Just two other things before you get to audience questions. Peer-to-peer, obviously, like BitTorrent and other protocols are active, as active enough that deep packet filtering and the FCC get involved. So at which point, or if any point, are you guys playing around with peer-to-peer from either an agency point as you create content or from a measure standpoint? Maybe start with the measurers first.
From a measurement standpoint, we don't currently track peer-to-peer. Where all our measurement at ComScore is pretty much through our panel, which is behavioral, and that's just a decision we made in a lot of our products to develop solutions based on what we see behaviorally. A lot of just what people are doing over time, exposures to ads online, and follow them through the panel behaviorally, not peer-to-peer.
Yeah, we've seen the biggest demand on peer-to-peer is rights management. So we haven't seen from an advertising perspective, a lot of interest in it. So we haven't gone there just yet. I think as we do things like the tagging solution with video, as long as that's embedded in there, it can be something that we start tracking on the desktop when people are playing videos and trying to understand where they came from.
Anyone else on the panel, peer-to-peer? David, you playing with it at all from an agency
Well,
perspective?
it gets recommended from time to time as a media buy.
Sure.
And again, I don't know if it's as good as the content, and also you have to think about the people on the other end, whether they're legally doing it or not. The whole peer-to-peer network was actually started through a lot of these companies that have come up. It came through rights management, so they have a really deep metrics tools and analytics. But ethically, you know, if you're serving up something that has an ad in it or some kind of content, when I'm searching for an album or a video, what's the experience of the user going to be on the back end of them receiving something they don't want or being duped into it? There's a couple of good case studies out there where the metrics really support people who are really into Jay-Z. Look at the Coca-Cola program that they did with original content, giving exclusive content that no one else had for Jay-Z and throwing it through peer-to-peer, and anybody who searched for it got it. So they could show a lot of metrics and how that really was an effective marketing campaign, but those are few and far between.
Yeah, and there's also
mean,
the cases of
go ahead.
there's also the cases of spyware that were coming in with peer-to-peer. So I think that's scared some advertisers
Sure.
and the populace
But
in general.
I'm also seeing network, maybe it's not the networks, maybe it's the producers, but like almost every major fall pilot was put online before they were on TV, whether that would, and I would have to say they were windowing strategies because these were pristine prints. I watched the first 3 episodes as Jericho that way. We measure peer-to-peer, so I'm actively dug into this space. And Jericho, which got taken off the air, then like the audience raised their hand to say, no, 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 don't go away. Then it comes back, and before it even hit the TV, that same audience, which is clearly online, was super served by having 3 episodes up front. Same with Weeds, same with just about every network show that you look at. So I'm watching people play in the space. I don't see it translate necessarily to television ratings because Jericho kind of got on the failboat after that and didn't have the numbers that you would expect. But I am seeing content producers put it in that space as well as people using it for distribution technology. So I do think it's emergent. Audience, I'd love to get some questions because there's a lot going on here. We have like 10, 15 minutes left. So audience questions, start with you. Yeah.
We create a casual game, so we're in the try before you buy market. You download games, you can try them for an hour before you buy them. And so we're in the business of creating compelling content that can engage for hours at a time. I'm just wondering if you guys have seen any interest in creating branded entertainment games and what sort of metrics have been developed when it comes to games.
Anyone?
Sure. Yeah, I think there is a lot of interest in branded entertainment games. I think the struggle is to make sure that there is a relevant connection with the brand, sort of partnering to create. There's a lot of branded versions of Bejeweled out there, and I'm not totally sure, you know, how that works from an awareness and certainly from a persuasion standpoint. We work a lot in terms of in-game integration with console games and some PC games as well, and we're looking at the same delivery and response metrics that you would look at across a lot of other channels. I think the struggle from an impression standpoint is that it's really defined differently across different titles and across different measurement platforms as to what an impression even is in terms of how long it's on the screen and how we're counting for it. So we look certainly at delivery and then response in the form of if there's any sort of downloadable content within games, how many people are downloading that content. And then within sentiment, I mean, the interesting thing now with, you know, the Xbox Live community and the PlayStation community and lots of sort of overlap between PC and console gaming is that there's these communities and they're very vocal about what they see and what they like. And so we certainly do track sentiment in that sense as well.
We have a couple of products in this area that treats game advertising much like any other form of media advertising, where you can look at the effectiveness of in-game ads as well. What you just have to ensure is that you're actually measuring the impression. So sometimes that's a challenge when there's no calls going back and forth over the internet with games. But if you know someone who has a game installed on their machine, let's say it's a PC, and every time they play that game an ad occurs, then clearly we know that our panelist has been exposed to that ad. If you've got ads in rotation that are flying across the internet much like display ads on a web page, then we'll probably see that call. And that ad impression can be treated like a display ad, can be treated like a video ad, search ad. It's just another media type that we can do a full ad effectiveness study on. We've done both behavioral and survey-based ad effectiveness, so asking people whether they saw the ad, what they thought of the ad, using a survey approach. A lot of people are looking, as I mentioned earlier, for actual behavioral effects. So after seeing the ad within a game, do you go ahead and then search for that particular product within a search engine? Or if it's a retail advertiser, do you go to that retailer's website? Do you buy on their website? So those kind of actions around ad effectiveness.
Excellent. Audience.
The Google double-click play, how do you see that impacting the traditional and current and future online advertising industry or models, if at all?
Greatly. I mean, from an analytics point of view, will we see more or less analytics are the ones, maybe the questions we should be asking. Because it sits all inside of one body now. I'm sure that it'll change part of the dynamic, but maybe not so visible to everybody on a day-to-day level. I mean,
what I was getting at is do you think that, for example, the traditional ad agencies are going to somehow get bypassed, kind of like the AdSense model where people go online and bid for stuff and it's all automated and kind of somewhat bypassing some of that traditional advertising business?
I don't
that's
think
it.
so.
Yeah,
I don't think that's going to happen. I mean, so Microsoft Atlas, right? That's who I work for. I mean, I think we're all for the Google double-click thing. The rising tide floats all boats. Competition is healthy. Options are good. They keep the bar high and the prices low at some level, right? So, good. You know, I hope they get their deal approved.
Go ahead. Thanks.
We're looking at a lot of technologies that are waiting to get to put in their monetization strategies now that they've got users comfortable with them, like Maps and different social networking things and YouTube. What do you see as some of the stronger trends of monetizing these assets? Are we going to see a lot of interstitial advertising in YouTube playlists? Are we going to see, how do you see advertising in map programming and things like that?
I'm not going to answer for the panel, I'll let them kick this, but I noticed yesterday that a couple applications launched with audio and video plugins for Google Maps, so you could actually leave like a little tent pole on your building and talk about it.
Oh, and
Good times.
One key thing, of course, is advertising in the mobile space, like with the Android mobile OS. How do you see these things monetizing? What form of advertising do you see? Is it mostly interstitial or something else?
Let's go to the agencies if we could.
Sure. I think in the mobile space right now, you know, certainly the most widespread, I think, are SMS and WAP executions. I think SMS is particularly interesting because it's really a connective tissue with other traditional sort of media sources. So you'll see very often TV spots, out of home, certainly in some print ads that will have an SMS code that you can text to enter a contest, or I mean, what AT&T and American Idol have done. There's a lot of activity there as well. I think WAP, sort of the same thing. It's very similar to the broadband advertising model right now, so it's very easily digested by a lot of current advertisers, and the penetration is healthy. It's, of course, growing. But I think, you know, we'll start to see more and more video ads on mobile phones, particularly because it's not only iPhones anymore. It's really standard handsets. These are the sets you get free with your new plan. And so I think, you know, a year from now, when everybody's contracts are up, they're going to be able to access a lot of these phones that give them sort of access to that type of information. I think that's where it's going to get very interesting from a mobile standpoint.
I mean, I'd say just, you know, so you touched on a lot of different things. I think, you know, the broad answer to your question is we are in a position to choose, and that's a very powerful position to be in, right? Back in early days of Avenue A, you know, it took us the better part of a couple of years to figure out how to get a banner onto Yahoo. And what was the process for doing that? And through the course of that, we created the IAB, and we determined that this was the right mixture of ad units to content on the page and page views and that whole thing. And I think we have the same opportunity now as a media landscape kind of shifts. We need to be very careful about how we consider what ad inventory we're creating. We need to be careful not to simply fall back on old models of creating ad inventory because they're easy. I think what we've seen with pre-roll is that it's kind of laziness or greed that we can kind of use, we can repurpose, we can do this, it's just TV online, right? And I think that's not necessarily the smartest choice to make. So again, I think it comes to answer that question, I think it comes back to starting with the audience, working backwards from the audience with an eye towards maintaining the value exchange between the audience and the brand and content at a very high level. And if you keep the focus on those two things, I think there's very little risk in identifying kind of what the correct method of advertising around a variety of different technologies is.
Excellent. I couldn't agree more about grafting from one medium to the next. It usually doesn't work. Kevin, did you want to?
Yeah, I would say I think as the technology becomes more robust and as mobile advertising comes further online, and we refer to it as 3 screens with the mobile being the 3rd screen, and most people talk about the robust nature of it being still a couple of years down the road, but yet I was reading something the other day that said that 1/4 of us, which is a pretty staggering number, have already seen an ad on our mobile phones, which is probably twice the amount that even I would have thought. But I think one thing you can't discount is with mobile phones is local advertising, simply because of the technology in the phones, the technology of the towers to know exactly where you are at a given time. And they will also have certain, psychographic geotargeting information on you as to what are some of the things that you like. So it is not out of the realm of possibility that you'll be walking towards 42nd and 6th, and you will see an ad for ESPN Zone. That's not out of the realm of possibility, nor is it technologically not feasible. So
Well, yeah, as location-based services really emerge, I just don't want to be like every time I walk by a Starbucks, get hit with a text message.
Yeah,
so let's hope that value exchange actually.
They'll throttle you because you're a paying customer.
Yeah.
But who's to say that there won't be cell players that come on the market that will actually be advertising-based providers that may not charge you a lot of money for your usage,
yeah.
but you'll get ads every time you want to make a call. You'll see an ad, and that's the way that they'll monetize it. But nowadays, it's also not one or the other. It used to be if you're a paying customer, you're not going to see an ad. If you're not a paying customer, you're going to see lots of ads. Now it's you're going to pay and you're going to see ads, or you're not going to get the content.
It's like the movies.
Oh, joy. The mobile is always the 3rd screen, and very often, we're surprised at what's taking place on it. But at the same time, it definitely probably has an open rate with SMS higher than other things. Is that stuff that people look at with SMS? Is that like a 90% open rate because you're reaching into someone's pocket and
Yeah,
they're going to do that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, to Patrick's earlier point about just not sort of taking an old set of metrics or an old way of doing things and applying it to new mediums, I can't tell you how thrilled my clients are when they see that we got a 10% click-through rate, in our mobile ads, and I'm like, well, it's not exactly the same thing. There was definitely a point online where banners got 10% click-through rate, so I think in some senses it's the novelty. I think, it's people tend to sort of gravitate towards it because it's what we know and we can make sense and we speak that language, but I don't think it's any sort of really meaningful or lasting set of metrics.
The other thing that always surprises me with mobile is that people who don't use computers use their phone as their primary connection to the interweb, and they basically, they might be engaged in mobile social networks primarily through their phone because they don't have a computer at home, so it's their easiest way to connect. So I think it's always surprising to me the amount of that happening and the reasons before it. Mm-hmm. Audience, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Big content owner like Disney or somebody, you're getting a set of reporting from the content delivery network that you use, you're getting a set of reporting from the web analytics vendor that you use, you're getting it from the ad insertion guys. So the question is, how much do they want to bring all this stuff together, and are they willing to do that, or do they want someone to do that for them? Because the only way to get engagement is to understand
The 180 or
where
360.
all the data sources kind of pull together to get somewhere.
I'll go ahead, and then I'd like to actually jump in myself on this one.
Yeah, I would just say that there's definitely an interest in that. There's lots of sources coming in, and there's lots of platforms in how to bring them all together, and that's actually expressly what it is that Teradata does when we say raising intelligence. We're talking about bringing in multiple feeds from multiple systems and tying it all together. And so, Mark, you mentioned earlier about passive data mining. We're obviously not a big proponent of that, because we believe that the really active data mining that you're doing is going to be able to get actionable intelligence from all of the data sources.
Sure, and a dashboard. So the things that are going to need to take place for that, as someone who has built a dashboard that's agnostic to data, is that you're going to want to make sure that anyone providing you with that data is at an API level able to do so. So just a question to the panel, how many people here have provided APIs for their clients to use with dashboards so they can get this type of view? And at the agency level, how many are you looking at a dashboard to provide your accounts with that type of information? You want to start? Go ahead, Alistair.
Every one of our data sources, like media metrics, our advertising impression data, is available in APIs. And so I'd say that it's becoming more and more popular for clients to take the data in. Sometimes they brand it ComScore, sometimes they don't. But that's fine.
Are there rule sets with that as well, like usage rules, like you're subscribing to our terminal, you're not subscribing to our API usage, and how they may use that after that?
It's always an extra fee for the APIs, but once it goes in, the clients can use it however they like, just as long as they're not reselling it and making vast profits off it. So we're very open to all kinds of APIs, and it really is just the raw data that's packaged up for companies like Google and others to take into their analytics suite and display it how they want to display it. And I think that's the beauty of it. You're not having a totally separate screen that looks like it's a ComScore design screen. It's the way Google or whoever else absolutely wants it to look to their user.
And
it's
that's
seamless.
key. I mean, data visualization is so key. I tend to only want to even look at graphs because as I get to drill down menus, my eyes start to bleed because it's so granular. And pardon the expression, but the reality is the quicker you can look at data and interpret it, and if you happen to have an API that feeds into a customer's machine that they can look at it the way they want to, all the better. Everyone else providing API level data here?
Yeah, we do. We provide APIs and custom feeds. We've seen the demand mostly from the largest publishers and the largest agencies, because you need the resources to create the tools and to do the kind of extra analysis that would come into play by taking the API and the feed. So, I mean, we do see that slowly going down, that as publisher, to publisher size, but for now it's been generally concentrated on the higher end.
Anyone else on APIs? David, are you guys, Colleen, are you looking at data that way internally?
I'd say there's a lot of automated tools, but we have an integrated dashboard that looks at all the digital components as well as all the quote-unquote traditional components, put that into an overarching dashboard, and then overlay success metrics from clients in terms of real business metrics so that analysis across all the data that they look at is relevant to their business as well as their brand.
That's when it gets actionable. I think we have time for one more question. Go ahead, sir.
As video online continues to creep up the quality food chain, I'm wondering, is there the opportunity to increase CPM rates if we also have high-quality advertising video associated with high-quality online?
Quality meaning like high definition quality?
Finishing out, what ABC's doing.
Or just better programming? No, high def.
Not better programming,
Okay.
a higher quality presentation of that video.
Anyone? Feeler?
I'd hope they don't go up. I mean, advertising agencies and our clients don't want the CPMs to go up, ever. I mean, honestly. Now, but I think it has to do with content. I don't think that you could deliver it in three-dimensional hologram, but if it's a crappy show, I'm not going to pay more just because it's a hologram.
I agree with that. I think right now the reason you're seeing full episode players valued at a higher CPM than some on-air stuff is because, you know, within those environments, we've really opened up to answer the questions and the needs that broadcasters are looking for. I mean, working for an integrated agency, I hear it all the time. They want more control. They want unskippable ads, which is currently not very widespread available on air. And they want actual sort of ratings for their brand commercials. So understanding people who have actually viewed and what they've taken, what sort of steps that they've taken as a result of that viewing. And online, we have it. You know, we have more control, unskippable ads. We can tell you exactly how many people viewed the impressions and what day of week and what time of day and what they did from there. And we can target in a better way. So I think the reason it's sort of inflated at the moment is because, you know, it's what on-air broadcasters are looking for. And so as hopefully the broadcast model starts to follow that lead and we can get there, I think CPMs will equalize.
I'd also argue that the reason the CPMs are high right now is that volume is low. That as reach increases, I would expect that's going to drive the revenue and CPMs will go slowly down.
Excellent.
I have a question a little differently, though. Does higher quality video change the frequency of consumers seeing advertising video? Is there any opinion?
Could.
Yeah.
It's content. Again, if it's not worth watching, it's not worth watching.
Yeah.
I mean, that's
No,
really.
no magic fairy dust is going to change that.
Yeah, I think the only thing I'd say, potentially movies. I think if you're talking about longer form video, it becomes a bigger play. But for a 3-minute YouTube clip,
Not
I don't mind even watching it in a
Sure.
little window.
Please join me in thanking our panelists for their time. Have a wonderful day.